Right now, Queensland councils and their communities are facing one of the biggest threats to their sustainability and livability. Central to these changes is the proposal by the federal government to reduce its contribution in Queensland to just 50% under the disaster recovery funding arrangements. If these changes go ahead, they will absolutely rip the guts out of communities like those here in the North Burnett, which are frequently impacted by severe weather events and natural disasters. In fact, just in the last 5 years alone, if you look at the funding the North Burnett Regional Council has received under the disaster recovery funding arrangements, if the federal government's changes were in place, we would be worse off by $11.4 million. This equates to 25% or 1/4 of funded recovery works, which would just simply not have been done if the changes that are proposed by the federal government were actually put in place. For a community like the North Burnett, where its lifeblood is dependent on things like the connectivity provided by its road network, these proposed changes, if they are implemented, would be absolutely devastating to the economic and social fabric of North Burnett communities. What is particularly bad about these proposed changes is the proposed removal of betterment funding. A very real example of just how important betterment funding is under the disaster recovery funding arrangements is right here on the Gayndah-Mundubra Road. The Gayndah-Mundubra Road was effectively washed away in flood events in 2013. But with the added benefit of betterment funding, Council was able to relocate this section of the road 11 metres uphill, concrete the lower section of the road, bitumen seal a further 900 metres, and significantly improve drainage, which overall has made it far more resilient to future flood events. If the changes proposed by the federal government had been in place and there was no betterment funding, this road would not be here today, and thus robbing farmers, graziers, orchardists, and our school children who rely on this road as a school bus route the opportunity to connect with markets, schools, local outlets, and indeed with the broader community. Now let's turn to something more recent. This is one that's consuming a lot of council's time at the present time and is a major source of concern for our community, and that is the Bonaccord Bridge here at Wetheram. In March earlier this year, there was a significant weather event that caused major flooding in the Burnett River and its tributaries, impacting the North Burnett communities and the Bundaberg area. During that weather event, this bridge was completely inundated. It was impassable and it was closed for a number of days. And as you can see, it remains closed still today. When the floodwaters receded, 2 of the 9 spans of this bridge were missing, and they were taken out by large trees and debris washing down Baramba Creek, and the bridge has been closed ever since. Under a reduced federal government contribution, someone would have to cover up to 25% in the gap in funding needed to reinstate this bridge. Our council, which has a small $20 million annual capital works program and which is already struggling with over a decade of operating deficits, would not have the capacity to fund the gap required to reinstate this bridge. The changes proposed by the federal government are real. They risk untold damage to the well-being of communities and their ability to build back after disaster events. Unfortunately, however, we have just seen far too often the federal government not listening to the views of councils. They ignored our pleas to continue the funding for the local roads and community infrastructure program. They have done nothing despite over 10 years of consistent, determined advocacy to increase the funding pool for the Commonwealth Financial Assistance grants, which are a lifeline for councils such as ours. And now we are seeing potentially our assets and our communities placed at risk by these proposals to reduce the Commonwealth's funding contribution to the disaster recovery funding arrangements. This is a dud deal for Queensland councils, but equally so, it's also a devious deal. Firstly, in a webinar with all councils in June this year, Federal Minister McBain indicated that these proposed changes are being put forward as a result of consultation with councils. Well, as a tip for young beginners, when you're proposing changes of this magnitude, the first place to start is with those people who are most impacted by the changes you're seeking to make. And unfortunately, we're still waiting for that call from the federal government to seek our views. Secondly, Minister McBain claims that these changes will result in a more efficient disaster recovery funding system and easier flows of funding to councils. Well, the reality is that here in Queensland, that's already been sorted out. And through the collaborative efforts of the state government, the Queensland Reconstruction Authority and councils, that system's working very well. And councils are getting funding that they require to recover from disaster events in a timely and ordered fashion. So if the system's not working efficiently elsewhere, my recommendation is that the federal government focuses on fixing the system elsewhere and using what's happening in Queensland as the model for how it should actually be done. And finally, if this was such a fairer and better arrangement for Queensland councils, then where is the Prime Minister and where is the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, who I might add is the most senior Queenslander sitting around the federal cabinet table in terms of spruiking the benefits of this deal for Queensland councils? The reality is they know this is not a fair deal for Queensland councils, and their silence has been deafening. Overall, this is a dud deal. It is a devious deal, and this deal for Queensland needs to be dumped.